Well, one person who knows all about being caught out by last-minute changes to quarantine rules is the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, and he's with us now. Hello to you.
Morning.
Because, of course, you had to can your Spanish holiday the day after you got there.
That's right, I did it to myself. I got to Spain and then had to put Spain in quarantine and leave my family holiday and come home. So I'm very aware of what people are going through, albeit that there aren't any English changes this week.
So one wonders how these decisions are being made, because to all intents and purposes, everybody in England and Northern Ireland thought that they wouldn't be able to travel back from Portugal. So a lot of people invested quite a lot of money on early flights. Those flights have been hiked, and they can. Why have you decided that England and Northern Ireland is still open on the corridor, whereas Wales and Scotland isn't?
It's a bit like the decisions on the lockdowns and the way the rules are being applied throughout the different parts of the United Kingdom throughout the coronavirus. So you're quite accustomed to seeing, for example, Scotland do one thing and say you can meet with so many people, and Wales do another, and so on and so forth. And actually, the travel corridors are similar to that, and I do realise it creates confusion for people not to have a single rule, but we do have this devolved approach throughout the United Kingdom, and I can only be responsible for the English part of that.
So why have we decided what we've decided?
So we all get data from the Joint Biosecurity Centre, and they look at it and they use a number of different measures. So it's not just the number of cases per 100,000 that counts, but also the positivity rate, how many of those cases are testing positive, and also how the government in that country is dealing with it, whether it's a local outbreak and many other factors, all of which I've tweeted about for anyone who's interested. Using that information, we're able to come to a conclusion. One of the things about using only a rate per 100,000, of course, is if a country does the right thing and does a lot of testing, then it suddenly finds that it is excluded if you only use that rate. So you must look at other factors, and that's what I've done, that's what we've done here. And this week, as I say, it's led to no changes, partly because the test positivity, for example, in Portugal, actually came down on the last set of figures when we were making this choice. And also on Greece, the overall numbers had come down. So this wasn't one-way traffic this week.
So you talked about localised issues there, forgive me. So Wales and Scotland have a different decision to England and Northern Ireland. Why don't we then separate Portugal from the Azores or Madeira, or Spain from the Balearic Islands, or the Canary Islands?
Yeah, I think there is an argument for sort of regionalising it, if you like. But having said that, and I know there was a big fuss about this at the time because I was in Spain and had to quarantine myself and send myself home, and people said, well, the islands are fine. Actually, the islands now wouldn't be fine. So often you do find there's crossover, but it is fluid, and I do accept that there is space to look at those types of things.
So you are going to look at that?
One of the reasons we didn't earlier, though, is we didn't have the level of information that the Joint Biosecurity Centre is now starting to process. So, for example, they've got to be certain that they can rely on the test data on an island, which might be a relatively small island and may not have, or in the earlier days of the coronavirus, earlier in the summer, may not have had the level of detail that we would need to assess that country. So that's why we haven't been able to rush to doing islands separately, for example.
But there's a massive landmass in the United States of America. How can you possibly judge, I don't know, California and Texas and places like South Carolina with Wisconsin? They don't have the same issue.
No,
and if we don't sort that out, the airline industry is kaput.
It's certainly true on a big landmass like that. There are lots of variations. On the other hand, it's relatively straightforward to travel between one place and another. And the overall level, so not just in the hot spots, but the overall level in the United States, for example, there's 88 cases when I last looked per 100,000. We're on about 14 cases, so you can see that there's an overall higher risk. And of course, people can very easily travel from one place to another to pick up a flight, and that would be a problem. But there's a bigger problem, actually. I'll just point this out with the United States.
If I may, Transport Secretary, it's very easy to go from Bristol to Cardiff.
Yes, no, that's true, but we have in the United Kingdom the ability to do an enormous amount of testing. So our testing is now, per population, bigger than Germany, bigger than France, and so on and so forth. We don't have that capacity in the United States. But I was going to say, Kay, there's one other thing about the United States, which is the administration there doesn't allow UK passport holders to fly there, or Europeans to fly there at the moment. So,
If they have a waiver.
if they have a waiver, yeah. But I mean, their principle is not allowing people in, and actually, interestingly, they did that very early on, and we saw it didn't help them with the number of cases that they end up developing.
The Daily Telegraph will be speaking to their travel editor shortly. They suggested airport testing is the way forward. Why do we not just do that?
Yeah, I know that airport testing is one of these things that sounds so logical. You come in, you get a test, perhaps one of these very quick tests, and you go off and you're free not to quarantine. The problem that we have, and this is what I'm working with airports on at the moment in the industry, is that a day zero test as you get home is unlikely to find the vast majority of people who've travelled with coronavirus but are asymptomatic. In other words, you don't know, and you shouldn't be travelling if you do think you've got coronavirus, of course. So you don't know that you've got it. You're tested on day zero. There are arguments about this, but Public Health England say that would perhaps pick up just 7% of people who are in fact positive and allow those people to sort of go off. So you probably have to have some kind of quarantine period in here. Perhaps 7 or 8 days, maybe a test then, but these are the things that we're working through at the moment.
And how does that differ from people in general society who have one of these tests? They don't have to quarantine.
So of course, somebody in general society won't have come back from a country with a higher level of coronavirus, which is the thing that we're trying to protect against. So if you went back to... Well, if you went back
We've also talked about it being regional within those areas.
But if you go back to the examples of Spain, I think off the top of my head, 130 cases per 100,000, as opposed to our 14. So you could see that somebody coming back from Spain, you wouldn't want them to be, as you put it, sort of wandering around in general society until they've been able to have a test that shows that they're negative, or, as is the case at the moment, have quarantined, as I had to do, for those 14 days. So it's not that we don't want to do these things, and I hear the calls from the airports, and I spoke last night to John Holland Kay, who's the boss of Heathrow Airport, and many others. It's not that we're ignoring the great work they're doing on trialling out tests, but I've spoken to my opposite number, for example, my French opposite number. They did put testing in, but of course have realised some of the same things, which isn't actually the silver bullet solution to this. What you've got to do is be able to test further down the line with a period of quarantine as well. I'm afraid this coronavirus is just not simple to navigate around, and we have to do our best, and that is what we're doing.
OK. I want to ask you about HS2, but first let me ask you, while we're talking about the aviation industry, what's all this about your private plane being registered in the US?
I saw this story.
Is it true?
Well, I've been an aviator, a qualified pilot for 25 years, and I've flown planes on the British register and the American register. But if you fly a plane on the American register, it still has to be maintained by British engineers in the UK. But not to the
same standard?
To the same standard. Well, I mean, there are varieties. The main thing people say on a US register is it's permissible to do some of the engineering yourself. Well, I have to say that's something that I've never personally attempted.
Yeah, so why bother registering it in the
I didn't. It's like if you got a car and it was on a French plate, would you change the plate? That's all it was.
So you're not undermining the rules at all?
I've never registered the aircraft on any register at all, so no.
OK. Talk to me about HS2 then. You are announcing the formal start of the construction on HS2. Hasn't it started already? There's
been lots of preparatory work over the years, and but this now is the first time after 3 years where there's sort of spades in the ground building the actual thing itself. And it's a good news story. I know it's been a very controversial project to get HS2 up and running. It's a good news story because this is the start of 22,000 jobs that will be created over the next few years, helping to build that first phase. That's from London to Birmingham, and then of course it goes up to Manchester, Leeds, and we'll make journey times right up to Scotland a lot faster as well. So good news today, and particularly at a time when the economy needs that boost.
OK, let's talk about Tony Abbott. Do you think that your colleague, the Health Secretary, misspoke yesterday when he said that what he actually said was what he inferred was that because he was good at trade, we could forgive his antecedents?
I didn't see the interview.
Oh, of course you did. He did 6 million views on. Do you want to see it?
I'm sorry, I have to put it on.
Let's have a quick look.
If you've got
it. Here we go. I've just told you what he said. I'm sure you don't support some of his comments. He's a homophobe and he's a misogynist.
Well, he's also an expert in trade.
So that's all right then.
Well, look, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any announcements made on this at all. So I think we should wait till we get an announcement one way or the other.
I'm asking you about Tony Abbott and whether you feel that your colleague misspoke when he said that it was OK for him to be a misogynist and a homophobe, reportedly, because he's good at trade.
Well, as I say, I don't want to sort of get in something where I haven't he hasn't been announced as
Not my
whatever this
question.
trade position is. I haven't studied the Tony Abbott record, and that's the first time I've seen Matt Hancock talk about it. So I know these things get sort of blown up and sometimes sort of, become a very big kind of issue here. But if he hasn't been announced, and I haven't personally seen all of his comments. Personally speaking, I don't think in modern society, I think people should respect each other, and I don't think I think we know the standards by which we would, have conversations. But, you're inviting me on something which I'm afraid I'm not a world expert.
Shouldn't you be? I mean, if he's going to be representing us around the world...
Well, and that's the big question, if he's going to be, so why don't we wait?
Well, don't we need to know?
And I'll come back. I will come back.
I'm sure you will, but I've got you here now, so I'm going to press you if I may. He may be, given that he is a climate change denier, given that he has said some despicable things about the elderly, and it didn't matter if they died of COVID-19, they should die naturally, given that he talked about women and ironing and some of the views on whether they should succumb to sex or not, given some of the views he said about basically homophobic views, would you be happy to have a drink with that man?
Well, as I say, you're inviting me to sort of comment on somebody who...
Because I wouldn't be happy to have a drink with him, would you?
Well, I've never been invited to have a drink with him. I don't think I've ever met him.
And what if you did? Would you accept?
Well, I prefer... First of all, I'd want to check the record for myself. I'm afraid I have to admit I haven't had time to do that. And secondly, I hate to bring us back to reality, but he hasn't been appointed to anything, and as far as I know, there haven't been any appointments made. So let's wait and see. And I promise I'll come back on your programme. I'm never shy of coming on your programme. I'll come back and talk about it, if it's actually an issue.
And you don't feel that you're dodging that question?
Well, I simply, you're asking me things which are very abstract in as much as nobody's been appointed to the position. So
no, but he's certainly being considered, and Priti Patel was courting him. We saw pictures of her with him, and Liz Truss is also very keen on him taking up the role.
Well, I don't think that the fact that somebody's met somebody proves that somebody's been appointed.
I'm posing for photographs in the Home Office.
Well, as I say, I'm not sure that actually proves anything apart from the fact he was a world leader of a major economy and economic and social friend of ours in Australia. But I know you're trying to draw me out on this. I promise I will come back.
He said some despicable things. As I said to your colleague yesterday, you're a forward-thinking 21st century man. Do you really want to be associated with some of those comments?
Well, as I say, there are lots of people with whom the comments I would vehemently disagree, but I'm not into defending people who are not actually carrying out any role for the British government. There's no reason for me to comment on it until or unless, and I promise you, I'll be back in your studio. Kate.
Good to talk to you. Thank you.